floor to the distinguished representative of South Africa.
Mr. President, I wish to align our delegation with the statements by Uganda on behalf of the G77 and NAM, Nigeria on behalf of the Africa Group, and Angola on behalf of SADC. South Africa appreciates the convening of this much-needed debate on the elimination of unilateral, extraterritorial, coercive economic measures as a means of political and economic compulsion. I wish to state unequivocally that my delegation believes that unilateral extraterritorial economic measures are a violation of the UN Charter, international law, as well as the purposes and principles of the United Nations. This debate comes at a time when there is a noticeable increase in the scope, targets, and extraterritorial nature of UCMs. The illegality of UCMs has been repeatedly reaffirmed by the Human Rights Council and the General Assembly. South Africa remains deeply concerned about the extraterritorial application of laws and regulations imposing unilateral coercive measures and urges states to make use of multilateralism, diplomacy, negotiations, dialogue, and other peaceful tools to resolve differences without resorting to coercive measures such as unilateral sanctions. Mr. President, we wish to reiterate that UCMs violate our solemn commitment pledged in the 2030 Agenda to leave no one and no country behind. We consider that it is urgent to stop these actions that devastate developing countries, threaten economic and social development of countries that are subject to them, and consequently prevent them from achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. In the current context, where we are forecast to meet just 12% of the goals, and in a desperate need to reviving our efforts to get back on track towards achieving the 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development, we need to acknowledge that UCMs endanger our collective aspirations and are a needless obstacle to achieving the SDGs, as well as the right to development. Mr. President, today more than 1 in 4 countries are subject to some kind of sanctions affecting a large segment of the world's population. A recent comprehensive academic literature review found that sanctions caused significant harm to the populations of targeted countries, worsening poverty and inequality significantly. The collapse in GDP and life expectancy were similar to those found during wartime. UCMs are a flagrant violation of human rights. Such practices are contrary to the International Bill of Rights, impacting on many rights, including the right to food, employment, education, and health. Alarmingly, unilateral sanctions affect various aspects to the right to health, including access to health care, nutrition, and access to and the delivery of vaccines and medical equipment, even during situations of emergencies. The burden of these measures impedes the realization and enjoyment of economic, social, and cultural rights of the most vulnerable, particularly women and children. Mr. President, we would like to highlight the catastrophic humanitarian impact of UCMs, which in addition to poverty, nutritional and health insecurity, includes destroying essential public services, educational opportunities of youth, the livelihoods of families, and increases the risk of the right to life in sanctioned countries. The Special Rapporteur has noted that some
特别报告员在报告里指出，对有关国家人道影响太大，以及
We especially emphasize our outright rejection of the use of food as an instrument of political and economic pressure. In this regard, we would like to express our outrage that the people of Gaza are still subject to a deadly famine as part of a genocidal onslaught. We further condemn the application of sanctions to international civil servants doing their job, for example, the judges and officials of the International Criminal Court. Sanctions also impede access to humanitarian aid, and experience has shown how the complexity of unilateral coercive measures, including overlapping sanctions, render humanitarian exemptions inefficient. Mr. President, even in the case of so-called targeted sanctions, the impact is further exacerbated by overcompliance by private sector entities out of fear of repercussions, magnifying the harm that they cause by widening the scope of effective targets to include non-sanctioned individuals, entities, and sometimes entire populations. UCMs also have negative spillover effects that seriously undermine third countries. This is a bitter reality that we and other neighbors of Zimbabwe, a country that has been impoverished by decades of sanctions, can attest to. We call for the urgent removal of the unjust sanctions against Zimbabwe in the interest of all people of Southern Africa. Our delegation would further like to register our categorical rejection of the European Union's Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, or CBAM, as an extraterritorial, unilateral, coercive, and trade-distorting measure under the guise of climate protection. A regime with dubious environmental benefits that would result in a reversal of climate finance from the global north to the global south to further enrich one constituency of the north, and that would allow developed countries that have primary responsibility for causing climate change to directly tax private companies of sovereign developing countries that bear the least responsibility for causing climate change. This is illegal, immoral, and inadmissible. Mr. President, we join other delegations in requesting the Secretary General to monitor the imposition of unilateral economic measures and to study, with the support and cooperation of the resident coordinators, the impact of such measures on affected countries in line with General Assembly Resolution 78135. We would also like to express our deep appreciation for the excellent work of the Special Rapporteur on the negative impact of unilateral coercive measures on the enjoyment of human rights. We further welcome the launch of the tool for monitoring and assessing the impact of unilateral coercive measures and overcompliance on human rights, as well as on the economic and social development of developing countries targeted by these measures and on achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. My delegation was also honored to have played a role earlier this year, together with the G77 and China, in ensuring the sustainable development impact of UCMs was included in the outcome document of the Financing for Development Forum for the first time since its inception. Finally, Mr. President, South Africa categorically rejects the application of unilateral coercive measures and calls on the sanctioning countries to withdraw them. The United States' designation of Cuba as a state sponsor of terrorism, together with the continued full application of the Helms-Burton Act, including the authorization to file lawsuits in United States courts under its Title III, further hinders Cuba's economic, commercial, and financial relations with third countries. This designation is unfounded, and we call for the removal of Cuba from that list, which is aimed at further punitive actions. Mr. President, we express our unshakable solidarity with all peoples affected by these illegal measures and join the calls for the international community to uphold the bedrock UN principles of sovereign equality, non-interference, and territorial integrity, and take urgent measures to eliminate the use of unilateral, extraterritorial, coercive economic measures as a means of political and economic compulsion. I thank you.